What's up, everybody? Today we have a very special video brought to you by Wizards of the Coast where we are diving deep on one of Magic's newest sets, Streets of New Capenna. We're gonna go behind the scenes and take a look behind the curtain about how a set like this is made, the development of the lore, the story, and the world that it takes place on. And we're joined by two very special guests from Wizards of the Coast. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Lauren Bond, and I am a creative producer over at Wizards of the Coast. And for this set, I worked on a lot of the art development, kind of interfacing with the game design team to really help bring this world to life.
And I'm Annelli. I am a consulting Loremaster for Wizards of the Coast. I worked on the story, getting all those fiddly details right, on the lore, and other stuff we'll talk about as we go through this interview.
One of the most exciting parts of New Capenna is right at the forefront, these 5 MAFIA-style families that run the whole place. And the really exciting part to me as a player is that they're in 3 color combinations. We used to refer to them as shards, but now we've got these whole new identities, and it's really exciting. I get to sort of choose what family I want to be a part of. So let's go through them and just give players and fans an idea of what they're all about. The first family is the Obscura, and their color identity is white, blue, and black.
So for all of the families generally, we really focus their kind of mechanical and I'd also say narrative identity around that middle color of their 3-color pie. So in this case, we're really focused on that kind of blue identity with the Obscura, which is really, they're all about kind of getting information, and obviously in Magic, a lot of the time that manifests by getting cards. Cards are cool, we all like them. And so for something like the Obscura, that's really a lot of what we were leaning into is that sort of mechanical side of it.
Yeah, they're really in the modern families, they're the con men, they're the grifters, they're the spies.
Yeah. They know everything.
They're the ones keeping tabs on everybody. They've got their oracles and they're using it to run grifts, which is a great twist on that kind of thing.
Yeah, because we've seen a lot of blue-black and it's always about spying, deceit, but adding in that white I think is really interesting, especially because I think it gives more sort of to work with when it comes to a whole family that runs a town.
And it kind of emphasizes, I think, the sort of control element. They are very much about knowing what's going on and using that information to make sure everybody is doing what they want. Like they very much control a lot of the flow of information in the city because they are the seers. They are the people with predictions and prophecies.
They are trying to keep a balance between all the families and making sure no one gets too powerful while lining their own pockets.
I see. Yeah, so instead of just spying, they're actually more on the side of blackmailing as well.
Yes, blackmail.
You can throw that in a little bit.
Yeah.
They diversify their portfolio.
There you go. Yeah. It's all about branding.
Yeah.
This is one I might say regularly, but allegedly.
Nice. All right, the next family is blue, black, and red, and these are the maestros. So what do we know about them?
So again, this one emphasizes a lot of that kind of middle color with the black. They are assassins, but they are artful assassins. Like literally, they're also art collectors, and they do a lot of stealing of art. And then they also assassinate people, and that's kind of their sort of core aspect of their identity. But then they're also sort of quick to get in and get out.
Yeah, they can really vary. They're all artists. They all believe, or at least believe they're artists at heart, and that, assassination is their medium of choice.
Yeah. It's an art form.
They got to do it with style and panache. They go loud if they have to, but usually they don't go out of their way to hurt civilians. But if it happens, art, you have to break a few eggs.
Would you call them homicidal artists?
Yes, I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah.
I like that we have blue-black both in Obscura and in the Maestros, but in this case, the black is, like you said, the middle color is their identity. So they're willing to sort of take action and be a little more aggressive with it.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, they're also the old money. They're the ones who are the most stylishly dressed. They're the ones who are the more refined palette.
So how does this manifest itself in the game? If the Obscura are more about drawing cards and getting information, are the Maestros more about killing things and getting them out of the way?
Yeah, so in terms of mechanics, it really emphasizes a lot in kind of using their resources, perhaps aggressively, perhaps destructively, a lot more kind of on that removal edge, a little bit more destructive
at any cost kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so.
The next family are the Riveteers, and this is black, red, and green. And they seem like they're the ones that, it seems obvious by their name what they're doing, right?
Yes, they're very the union workers, the sort of working class kind of mob. I mean, they obviously still have a lot of resources because they're a mob family, but they're sort of appealing to a little bit more of the grounded, hardy sort of side of the
They're
city.
legitimate construction businesses.
Very legitimate. Sometimes
very legitimate.
legitimate deconstruction business as well.
Sometimes, accidents happen.
Right.
And if you mess with the riveteers, you might find your apartment building collapsing, or that you suddenly took a long walk off a very short walkway.
Where did that sewer hole go? Oh no, I'm in it. Yeah, I see what you mean.
And so each of the families also has a base, sort of an established location within the city. And so there's 3 kind of main levels of Capenna, and the riveteers are very much found at the bottom. They're very, very much the base of the city, both literally and metaphorically in this
Foundational.
case. The foundation, yes.
They built the city, and they can
see.
take it apart just as easily.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, this is the streets of New Capenna, and they seem like they're the ones that help build the city, so they obviously have a bit of ownership over it too.
And so as far as gameplay, really focusing around that kind of red color in their tricolor pairing is that they're really about hitting fast and hitting hard. So they're very much using the resources of the many numbers of the Union to kind of get in there and then get out really quick.
Right, and even when you think there's no more, there's more coming up.
They're buffing each other up, they're supporting each other, they're a union.
Yeah. The next family is the Cabaretti, and they are red, green, and white. And these seem like the most fun of the bunch, right?
They're the party animals, for sure.
But literally, too.
Literally and figuratively.
There are many cat, feline characters in this group. They love a party. They're all about celebrating. They're all about bringing everyone in. In some ways, they're probably the least exclusive.
You don't have to have a particular skill set, but when politicians and judges happen to go to a Cabaretti party, they might find they aren't allowed to leave until they do what the Cabaretti want.
And then in terms of kind of gameplay, it really, again, they focus around that sort of green, kind of using the group. It's very much a kind of the whole collective of them working together to sort of overpower and overcome their obstacles.
Right. Everyone has sort of a different kind of power, and the Cabaretti are influencing you.
Bring them all together.
They're
Loyalty.
the influencers,
Yeah. Oh, perfect. I know all about that. The final group is the Brokers, and this is green, white, and blue. And pretty interesting. They're kind of a law firm with demonic ties. So how does that work?
I think the Brokers are one of the places where we really played with what are colors in Magic and what do they really mean. And I think all of the colors kind of have these, I'd say, positive sides and have these sort of negative sides. This idea of what happens when you take something to its extreme. And I think that's very much where the Brokers sort of landed. Like, what happens if you take control and law and organization to the extreme, and they will keep you safe, but at what cost?
Yeah, they're the lawyers of the city. They're I think I heard them described as ambulance chasers. They are always there when something seems to go wrong. And
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not.
And
they've got a contract with a lot of fine print for protection. They do run a lot of the protection rackets in the city, and they've got a lot of fine print, and they don't hesitate to call in those favors. They're very much the favor trading group.
Yeah, in terms of the gameplay, that's really like leaning on, I think, that extreme end of what you see with White, where it's about protecting, it's about fairness, it's about that sort of controlling out and preventing other people from doing what they might want to do. And in their instance, they're using the fine print to manage that. So finding ways to kind of play around with white, where we often think of as this color of like, oh, life gain and nice
good
things. And it's like, oh, no.
Sunshine and rainbows.
Sometimes
and
it's
unicorns.
real mean.
Yeah. Well, what I really love about all these families is that they feel super grounded, you know, because I think it is kind of simplistic to say white, good, black, evil. In this case, it's like white order can be twisted and used in a number of different ways that isn't necessarily inherently good. So when you're designing a set like this, obviously it's magic. There's gonna be murder, there's gonna be deceit, there's gonna be all sorts of elements of magic, and then you look at the real world saying that has all of them. Sort of what do you draw from first when you're building the set? Are you going, oh, you know what, I love this so much, let's find a way to work it into magic, or I love magic so much, let's find a way to work it into this setting?
It can really happen in two ways. We have our sort of very high level top line pitch, I think, for this world was like demon mobsters. And that's really where we started with. And it is still demon mobsters. We really kind of stuck to that. And when you say, oh, we have mobsters, what are elements that we might want to bring in? And oftentimes tropes are a little bit limited. Like they're the sorts of things that work really well on an individual card. And we have some beautiful like individual card trope references like that sort of harken to things that you would expect, like let's make a deal and sleep with the fishes. Like those are the sorts of things we can kind of get on an individual card, but it's not really enough to make a whole world. I can't sort of establish that much around it. And so we sort of broaden out and think, what are all of the things associated with mobsters? What are all of the things from the 1920s? And what do we want to draw from?
Right. And there are other elements as well. Like we see Elspeth in like the flapper girl element outfit. Vivian kind of gets a PI outfit for the noirish vibe that goes in there. So there's also a lot of, it's not just like mob tropes, there's noir tropes.
And that's the sort of broadening out of the genre of what still makes sense with demon mobsters. Like if those are your two things that you're kind of riffing off of, what makes sense to bring in from the wider sort of genre setting as well.
All right, well, we've covered the families, so let's talk about the world itself on New Capenna. Where did you mainly draw your inspirations from?
So once we had Demon Mobster, that kind of led us to the 1920s and the sort of aesthetics of Art Deco. Definitely drawing inspiration from sort of real world locations around like architecture, but then really just kind of taking that to an extreme. Like this city is literally built in 3 layers. So we have the Caldaya, we have the Mezzio, and we have Park Heights, and it's very much this sort of massive, like it's hugely vertical.
Yeah, I guess we should make clear, this isn't like a world city like Ravnica is.
Yeah.
It is one massively tall city built on top of one another.
Oh, okay.
And Park Heights is our Hollywood, the glitz and glam of Hollywood in the 1920s.
Mezzio is very Manhattan-esque, the sort of, a lot of the facades that you see in those sorts of East Coast cities. And then
the Caldaya is Chicago, Beamtown.
Beamtown, right.
So they are very much the foundry of the city.
And obviously then taking that into kind of the sort of fantasy aesthetic, adding in the sort of features, like obviously this is literally a city built on top of itself, so it already kind of adds to that. But then weaving in the sort of fantastical elements, the places where there's magic, the different types of jobs and people that you would have in these places.
And it's interesting, I think anyone that watches cinema will have seen so many Mafia tropes over the years. So how do you bring that into a magical world and still have it resonate with Magic fans?
Well, there are kind of a few different ways that we sort of thought about doing it. One, giving each of the families sort of its unique identities lets us play off of the different aspects of the setting and the different aspects of the trope. So we have, again, with like the cabaret, that's really leaning into like your party vibes, the sort of 1920s when people like dress up from that era, wearing those costumes, like that's often what they're thinking of. And so we sort of bring that into a mob family, and that's really addressing that kind of specific aspect of it.
I love seeing with the cabaret too, they have that big party vibe, you know. We're looking at a green light off in the distance, we're cheersing to bringing everyone together. Very much that F. Scott Fitzgerald world, I think, that people loved the feeling of.
Yeah, and it's sort of something that you would expect from that time period, right? And so being able to kind of give each family this aspect of that world allows us to like really drive and dive into it without having to, I think, oversaturate or sort of muddy the waters across them. You can sort of be like the parties of the cabaret, and that is where that's happening in this world.
And then like with the maestros, we've got more of the Godfather aspect, where they are all very finely dressed, or they're the old money running their empire gloriously.
We've talked a little bit about like the Riveteers are this sort of union or family, and that is a huge part of the era, both historically speaking, and also we often see it kind of echoed in pop culture. And that was one where we really wanted to kind of base a family, both to give us something a little bit in contrast. We have these
we have all these fancy mobsters. We needed like my grandfather, cousin Tony in there.
Yeah. You want to tell us something about your grandfather?
We're good. I think statute of limitations is passed, so I think we're okay, but no.
From what we've seen so far in the art and the spoilers, this feels like the most modern set Magic's ever had. So what are the challenges of bringing that into a world that is traditionally more in high fantasy and still make it work?
Obviously, thinking about like what does magic look like in these sorts of settings is a big part of it, but also what does technology look like? We sort of associate certain things with the time period, like what does weaponry look like? So you have sort of very specific thoughts of like what the weapons from the kind of modern real world era would look like, and we want to make those fantasy.
Yeah, one of the things that you traditionally think about when you think about Mafia and the tropes are firearms, but Magic doesn't really jump into that world. So how do you deal with that? How do you make magical weapons work?
So in this instance, we put a lot of sort of thought into kind of what the design would look like and really emphasizing how are they fantastical. And some of that is they're literally powered by Halo, which is the really important magical substance that kind of is the sort of conceit of why our planeswalkers are on this plane. And that became the sort of like, okay, we have these magical power sources, but also from the design, rather than bringing in more like traditional firearm elements, we really leaned heavily into like musical instruments was one of it, which I think is a really lovely touch because it also plays off of like carrying it in your violin case, but it's literally a violin.
You know, there's a moment in one particular story where someone pulls out their violin and everyone's just like, he's got a violin, get down!
And so sort of riffing off of kind of nodding to the tropes, but creating our own design space that we get to play with, and then giving that information to our artists so that they have kind of a toolkit to create with, so that we can sort of keep it within what we want and what we're feeling is fantasy.
There's also some magic where, you know, wizards, in order to cast spell, have to move their hands around. Well, some of them cast spells with pew 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 with their finger guns.
Little finger guns.
Yeah.
Was there ever a worry that it would be too modern, or that it might sort of take players and shock them a little bit and maybe be something they didn't like?
I think we're always threading that needle. It's something for us we want to be able to explore and push the boundaries on, but we obviously still want this to be exciting and appealing for people. Like, we want you to feel like you're playing Magic, but we want to make Magic as cool and as expansive as it can possibly be, and that is definitely part of the design process. So thinking about how we costume these characters, what the settings look like, really bringing in those elements that you would still expect to see both from the genre and also just from it being a Magic set. So there is a lot of special effects, and there's magic, and there's cool costumes. There's glitzy, sparkly things all over the place, but it is very different. So we're kind of excited to sort of open that up and give us more spaces to play in for everyone.
Right, and you have so much to work with.
Yeah.
I feel like that must be such a difficult process to select. We want this, but not that. So how do you sort of make those decisions?
We have a long development process. It's a big part of it. We start like 3 years in advance.
Wow. Yeah.
We do a lot of work up front to sort of create as much information as we need to assign out, because we have hundreds of artists that'll work on an individual set. And so we need to let them know, like, this is what it means. Like, don't just go do any old Art Deco. We want our specific version of it. And so we have a huge refinement process where we really develop what each of the individual families going to look like, down to their aesthetics and their motifs. Like, what designs do they have on their pieces of clothing, so we can set them apart. So when you pick up a card, you can look at it and say, that's a Cabaretti.
Gotcha.
Oh, and that one's a Maestro.
Yeah, and there are hundreds of pages like of the World Guide devoted to explaining all that stuff.
Yeah, and you're the Loremaster, right? So does that ever get overwhelming?
Oh yeah. I have a lot of spreadsheets. I have a lot of spreadsheets. That's how it goes, to remember like the names. This particular setting was really great because one thing that's really known about like this 1920s vibe is there is a lot of slang from back then that is just completely different from anything we say now, but it's really resonant, and the team did a really great job developing a lot of that kind of slang for the different factions, you know, what different classes of groups inside the factions, and have all these great names that feel very resonant in like a 1920s setting.
Well, speaking of the factions, at what point did you sort of know we have to do 3 color pairings for this, and this is what fits best with what we're designing, what the lore is providing, and all that?
So there's like this whole art building process where we kind of need to think about what standard looks like and how we set our gold sets. And you kind of can't have a 3-color set as like your first set in the rotation, because there's just not enough cards to support it. So if we want 3-color sets, they're sort of happen slightly later on in our year, and we have to spread them out. We can't be like 3-color set, gold set, 2-color set, because it'll be overwhelming and it won't work, and you won't be able to draft these cards together, because we want you to be able to build decks with all of the cards that are available in standard, but we also want you to enjoy building decks just in this particular setting.
Right.
And so kind of thinking about how all of our sets are sort of arranged across the year is part of it, and how many of these sort of 3-color sets. And this one in particular, we haven't done a 3-color set since Ikoria. Is the appetite there therefore, is that something that's going to enhance the play experience?
Well, I will say, as a player, the appetite is not just there. I am starving, and I will take any crazy glands that help me play in my favorite formats. But when you make a decision, having the Maestros be a vampire family, is that in part because we've just had vampires and you want players to sort of keep with that theme if they want to build towards it? Or is it, just because they thought it really fit well with the world?
It's normally a little bit of both. Like when we design a lot of the early world building of these sets, the exact nature of what the spreads look like are like you put all the meme in front of the numbers aren't fully fleshed out. So there are still a lot of question marks that we're kind of wondering with, but we do a lot of testing to make sure that all of these cards like still work together when you want to draft in a particular archetype. A lot of this one was really sort of driving that we wanted the creature types to have sort of a kind of one to sort of grasp onto for each family, one to build out that sort of more fantastical element of the world, because they're not all humans. In fact, humans are probably some of the least common creature types that you're going to find. And to also sort of emphasize that each of the families are sort of different with their different origins.
Yeah, so the Maestros are very vampire focused, but then you get into the Cabaretti and they're very Leonin. You also get a lot of elves along with the Cabaretti.
Yeah, and our elves are also like stylistically different, and they all have little horns, which is like my favorite. So it's all ways to set these creature types apart on different worlds, so that you can be like, oh, that's an elf from Capenna, or that's a Leonin from Capenna. It's as opposed to from a different plane.
So that's really interesting, because you are using the same creature types, but you're distinguishing through the lore, through the art, and the ways that they express themselves, and even their mechanics to a slight degree.
That's one of my favorite things, actually, is how each plane has a different flavor of what these are. So we also have, like, Riveteers have Viashino, which we've seen a lot before, but these are more like draconic in this particular version, because their boss is a dragon and had the big draconic reawakening for them. We also see, like, the return of cephalids here for the first time in, like, 20 years. The Obscura has all these very coolly designed, updated cephalids that are like bioluminescent. They're amazing.
Oh, wow.
The Brokers are very much, they have the Aven. They have a lot of Paladin background. They have Aven, they have rocks. The rhino kind, not the stone kind. Their leader is sort of the Italian falcon, but, Falco Spara.
It does feel right that a bird has a quill to write with for contracts, right?
And even
he just plucks it out. And
with the birds, we also do, like, the birds are sort of themed often based off, like, what the card is. Like, there's one that's an art thief that's a magpie.
Oh,
and so we can kind of play with some of those sorts of a little bit real-world analogs, but also kind of specific to that group. And I don't think we've seen, like, bird magpies particularly.
No,
on
they're
any
usually
cards.
Avens usually fall into like birds of prey and stuff, so it's nice to get that variety.
Yeah, and we saw
city birds.
The city birds,
City
yeah.
birds.
We saw teacher birds recently, now we have city birds. Yeah, I mean, some of the greatest artists in the world are bringing these things to life, and
It's really satisfying when you're like, I draw a raccoon being angry, and then an artist is like, here you go, and you're just like,
Here's an angry. Oh yeah, we haven't mentioned the raccoon folk yet.
we have raccoons.
So the city of New Capenna is full of raccoon folk.
as any big city is.
Yeah.
As any
it
big
should
city
be.
is, yes. There's an entire peopleified, personified group of trash pandas.
Amazing.
That are, some of them are in families, other of them have formed their own little raccoon
We saw them in the
gangs.
story, right?
Yes, we see some attack Elspeth. Yeah, so they are a fun little element of the setting that I really enjoyed.
I love them. I love them so much.
Yeah. So what you're saying is Raccoon Tribal is about to take over Standard. You heard it here first.
And obviously then taking that into kind of the sort of fantasy aesthetic, adding in the sort of features, like obviously this is literally a city built on top of itself, so it already kind of adds to that. But then weaving in the sort of fantastical elements, the places where there's magic, the different types of jobs and people that you would have in these places.
And it's all very much rooted in like a high fantasy world. Like this is, several centuries ago, this was looked a lot like Bant, probably. Not necessarily literally Bant. This is not Alara, even though it's also got like Chardeline colors.
Yeah.
But it was very much that kind of medieval high fantasy vibe that had this tragedy happen. Everyone had to flee into this city essentially built by the angels and demons working together. And
rapidly came up.
Came up. Everyone was smushed inside and had to find a way to get along. So that would be called Old Capenna. So people were wondering, well, if this is New Capenna, where's Old Capenna? Old Capenna is the reference for the way the world used to be, essentially. What they call, I think it's like the Kingdom era. So Old Capenna is that old medieval high fantasy society that no longer exists because everyone had to flee and escape into the protection of New Capenna.
And New Capenna is pretty literally built on top of Old Capenna. And the plane itself is, we see sort of that, we hear or we sort of acknowledge references to like, hey, really bad stuff happened here. People like do still live outside of the city, but not significantly in small numbers. It's sort of a very rough existence if you're outside of the city because it is clearly was not protected.
Like New Capenna is this one city in a specific location just built up into the sky, but there's not really enough outside of it that there's really a separate plain name for it. Because if you're there, there's only one thing of interest.
Yeah, that bastion of protection is the city itself.
Right.
Yeah, you probably don't really want to go outside. It's like not very nice.
So you can call it New Capenna, you can call them New Capennan or just Capennan. I think both work.
This city is really interesting because it appears that the 5 families run everything. Is there no sort of central government to make some rules, or are the families responsible for all of it?
That depends on how you define government. So some might argue the same thing about our past. So there is a government. There are elected officials. There are judges. Elected. They generally belong to the Cabaretti. Basically, the families run things, but it benefits them all to have a show of a government.
I see.
But really, they're all the politicians, all the judges are all in the family's pocket.
Right. The books have been cooked in every way possible. But
Right.
to the outside onlooker, do they know that too? Do the people of New Capenna be like, yeah?
They've resigned themselves to it.
Right.
There's no real like law enforcement on the plane. It is the families and like the brokers ensuring that you get justice for something. But that's really where it stops. Families often run rampant, and when people get unhappy, it's really when people get unhappy or the other families. They might not be too happy if you're killing too many people in broad daylight because it upsets people and it makes it hard to do business.
Right. It seems like they're all kind of with this very tenuous balance.
Yes.
No one wants to step too out of line, but they still have to maintain control, which is pretty cool.
Yes.
It
turns out they do fight each other pretty often.
There's no countryside to escape to if things get hot. So you gotta work with the people who are there.
So it seems like the 5 families have really settled into their roles, but were they always like this?
So no, they all come from a background that's very rooted in that high fantasy world that Old Capenna used to be.
Ah, okay.
So the Obscura were the mystics. They were the wizard advisors. They helped guide the fates of kingdoms and do things along those lines. When Rafine made her demonic pact, they started shifting more from advisors to the angels on how to build the city into looking out in their own self-interests a little more and more over time. And that happened with most of them. So the maestros, for instance, were the art aficionados of the old world. They were the nobles. And as time went on, they were the ones who saved most of what the people of New Capenna know of Old Capenna.
The records.
So, they saved the records, they saved the art and culture. And they actually have a whole museum where they display this for everybody. So not all the families are completely evil. They've got good aspects and bad aspects, right? They've got legitimate businesses, and then they've got alleged business. Yeah.
Then the Cabaretti were the sort of druids, so they have their own druidic language.
They used to practice a faith where they had parties to help connect them to nature every year. And because New Capenna is so separated from nature, in order to feel that connection, they started partying more and more and more until it just became their way of life, their primary way of doing things. And Jetmir still very much thinks of himself as the high druid of the family.
And then the brokers were the sort of paladins, the protectors. So they were doing a lot of the kind of knightly functions that you might think of in Old Capenna?
They were like the traveling paladins. They would make pacts with villages in order to protect the villages. Usually it was subsistence, like the villages agreed to give them shelter and food, and they would defend them from whatever the problems might be at the time. And that kind of evolved more and more over time to be more and more legalistic and problematic. And Falco is also aiming towards a very greater good goal where he believes there is some sort of world-ending prophecy that might be coming true, and that they need as much halo as possible for that. So in his mind, everything he's doing is for the greater good.
I see. Wait, they're doomsday preppers then?
Basically, not in the modern sense, but yes, they are very much working towards a goal they're keeping secret.
A little conspiratorial. They see something, they think it's going to happen, and they want to plan for that. Right. And how about the Riveteers?
So the Riveteers were the artisans of the old world. They were the blacksmiths, they were the edificers, they were the architects. And Ziatora was a thrill-seeking dragon. Basically, when she took control, she moved them in a very different direction, very much focused on both building wealth, but also having a great time doing it, doing cool stuff, having that rush. She discovered when she was a young dragon the rush of fighting knights. Like, she didn't care up until a certain point, and then she's like, oh, wow. This was awesome. Like, I should do this some more.
It's in my genetics. I gotta fight some knights.
And so that has kind of gotten put into the Riveteers' DNA. They very much like fighting. You'll see their land is even based around a fight ring. So
very cool.
A boxing ring of sorts, a magical boxing ring.
That's great. Yeah, you see that the leaders influence these sort of pre-existing groups, and those are all the foundations, I think, of like a functioning society in a lot of ways. And as they rise to power, and now are the 5 primary families, that's how they run business around this town.
Right.
And often very much taking those things to an extreme end that where the greatest good they're working towards is themselves.
Right. I mean, outside of just control and power, are these crime families fighting for anything more than that? Or is it they just kind of want to be at the same standing as everyone else?
Halo is definitely the biggest one. That's sort of the resource of the plane, and they all want more of it, as much as they can get, because it fuels their power, it fuels their technology, their weapons, themselves. It's also tasty. We have sort of an initial understanding of what it is, and its sort of greater significance is still pretty mysterious.
So in the Vivian side story, which you should all have the opportunity to read by now, she encounters a wounded Urabrask. So on these other planes, we've seen Vorinclex recovering himself on Kaldheim. We've seen Jin Gitaxias doing just fine on Kamigawa. And then Urabrask doesn't seem to be recovering as quickly as the others, and that he seems to think that has something to do with the halo.
So is there anything else that you can tell us about the Phyrexians that just a little hint or a tease even, because I'm really fascinated.
So these are old Phyrexians that New Capenna was dealing with. These are not the modern New Phyrexians, if you know your magic lore, the oil spread by Karn. There was a old Phyrexian incursion into New Capenna at some point in the past. The Archangels of the Plane rallied a defense. They built New Capenna. They even worked with demons to get it done in order to build this city as a refuge for people. And so lots of people, waves of migrations came to this city and started their new lives in New Capenna. But what happened after that point is something that we'll learn as the story progresses. We don't see the angels really anymore. We see icons of the angels all over the place, but we don't know exactly what happened to them just yet. And that's something the story will talk a little bit more about.
And the Phyrexian force was clearly dangerous enough that the angels were willing to work with demons, which seems like an absolute no-no if you were an angel. But in this case, things just got that bad, huh? Yes.
And they were still, until Elspeth's childhood, which was, I should be clear, just like 20, 30 years ago, she's not centuries old, there were still pockets of Phyrexians out there.
That's fascinating. So, it seems like New Capenna has a lot of its own secrets, and there were even Phyrexians there just when Elspeth was a child, so it means that the threat isn't actually fully gone. They're still there to some degree, but it's not the Phyrexians we've seen before.
So we might get some hints about what happened to the Phyrexian pocket that Elspeth grew up with. I should be very clear, we don't see those particular Phyrexians in this set. And maybe there's a reason for that, I don't know, read the stories. But these particular ones were offshoots of the original 9 spheres of Phyrexia led by Yawgmoth that tried to invade other planes, as we know from, I don't know, pretty major story from Magic's past. You might have heard of it.
That's fascinating. So the Phyrexians have clearly proliferated, and the ones that we're dealing with now are a bit of a different flavor, but we don't know much about it, and we may not even see it in this set, but it seems like it's building towards something a little bigger, right?
They are the reason that Urabrask has come to this plane.
I see.
And he was investigating that. And maybe if you read the Vivian story, you might find a hint about what happened to them.
Cool. Well, there's a lot of history to New Capenna that in the story we're finding out we don't actually know. Even the mob bosses don't have a full working memory of it. And if you want to read those stories, they're all going to be in the show notes, and I highly suggest you read them because it's really great stuff.
We'll definitely give a little bit more information about what's happening, what Halo is, but they all want more of it. And that is kind of the impetus for this set, is that there is sort of the inherent conflict over it, but there is the newcomer in town, our dear Mob Nixilis, and he's sort of disrupting that delicate balance between them because he's coming in and taking control of that trade.
He is recruiting people from all the different families, having them betray their people, taking a whole lot of the Halo, and Halo itself is starting to run a little scarce. So competition and control of it is becoming more and more fierce as time goes on.
We're seeing this point where the family leaders all kind of signed this pact and made this agreement, and it's sort of reaching its kind of tether of effectiveness. It's not working as well as it was before because that resource is running out. And so it's all kind of coming to a head at this point.
It's sort of the inciting incident of the plane.
Which is a great place to have a Magic set, because we can have all of the sort of normal crime stuff and then all of the extra crime stuff on top.
Crime on crime. Well, I think a lot of fans are going to be excited to see Elspeth is back. She's been through quite a lot. Thought she was gone for a while, but now she's found herself on New Capenna. So can you give us a sort of a broad overview or what's happening with Elspeth on the plane?
What we knew about Elspeth's backstory up until this point was very little. We know she grew up in a Phyrexian dungeon. She spent a lot of time on Alara as a youth and trained as a knight because it was this more idyllic society. Whether she was unconsciously drawn to it because it was sort of a high fantasy realm like she had hoped her home would be or what. But when that got tainted by Grixis, she moved on and discovered New Phyrexia and the threat of New Phyrexia and fought there for years until it was finally very clear it was a hopeless battle. And so she went to Theros trying to seek answers from the outside. If anyone can help her find meaning or find true goodness in the multiverse, it's got to be gods, right?
Of course.
And it worked out perfectly for her, and it's all happily ever after.
Yeah, everything's
really
fine.
great.
Found the love of her life, things are going great.
Yeah.
So
no
she by accident, she was induced a hallucination wherein she thought she was fighting a Phyrexian negator, and she actually was fighting her love, Daxos, and killed him. And it didn't go well from there. All the gods turned on her. She managed to defeat the person who was behind all of this, Xenagos, but Heliod was not so forgiving, and he ran her through with her own spear.
Right.
So then she was languishing in the underworld until one day Ashiok came along and found all sorts of delicious fears in her mind and nightmares. And Ashiok, accidentally, they didn't intend for this to happen, but Ashiok may have inspired her to escape the underworld. She created a simulacrum of Heliod's spear made out of Ashiok's nightmare magic and used it to force Heliod into another confrontation in the underworld where Erebos could trap him. And in exchange, she was given life again. So she was reborn essentially in a new body. She doesn't have the scars of her old body. So she's already feeling like a little weird in her skin when Ajani sends her to what might be her home, and is also feeling like dissonant from where what she believes home should be. And so part of this is she's trying to figure out, is home a place? Is home where you're comfortable with yourself? And that's where we start with Elspeth in this story. And also she really wants to kill some Phyrexians.
Yeah, so she clearly has a very difficult childhood and has gone through so much. Did you always know that she was going to be from New Capenna, or is this something that as you were building the world out and looking at what influenced the world's actions, going, hey, wait a minute, this might be a perfect spot?
So the fantastic Jenna Helland, who is the creative lead on the set, reached out to me one day when they were in development of the set and said, what have we actually said about Elspeth's home plane. Like, how can we fit this? How can we make this happen? Because it was important to her to find a way to make this work, because it was like the perfect plane to set it on. So, you know, a lot of times you will set up a dangling story thread that when you get the opportunity down the road, you can make it come alive a little bit more when you have the right opportunity.
Yeah, that's great. I also find it really fascinating that Elspeth, it's a mono-white planeswalker, and she's joining a Grixis family to do work for them. I mean, that has to be tearing her apart from the inside, right?
Oh, it's very much an internal conflict for her, and it's sort of the work through convenience or necessity. The Maestros are the family that have that knowledge. They have the museum. They keep these records of old Phyrexia. So she sort of quickly realizes that if she's going to find what she needs, they're the people that she has to work with.
It's also an element of growth for herself, because Grixis itself, not the Grixis alignment, caused her to flee her idyllic home of Bant, right? She left. So now she has grown to the point where, you know, she's worked with Erebos in order to stop Heliod. She has really realized that there are some things that are more important than black and white, the black and white worldview she might have had at one point, and she's willing to, in order to do the greater good, which is stop New Phyrexia in the future, she's willing to work with the Maestros now.
And there's also an important point, though. She still kind of retains her moral compass and her values. She's pretty adamant when she's working with the Maestros that there are things that she will not do, even though she knows who she's working with and that they are quite comfortable doing those things as the Maestros. She is not comfortable doing those things. And we definitely see in that sort of first story in particular her kind of just reticence to join any of the families and sort of resignation when she realizes this is how I get what I want.
Right. Yeah, you kind of have to work with other people, and the city's all about that connection.
And I think in particular, Capenna, it sort of drives home that not being part of a family is difficult in Capenna.
Yes.
They are family, and they are also your support network, your resources, just your power and your status. Like, everything you have from Capenna is typically derived from being part of a family. So your average everyday person has a pretty hard time because they are not sort of, no one has their back.
Yeah, we've sort of seen this similarly with Jace having to work with being the Guild Pact and having to do these things that he never thought he had to.
He did a fantastic job, I have to say. It went smashingly.
Yeah, I would imagine that the ability to just planeswalk is something that actually detaches you from society. So I think it's really great, and it's a homecoming in a lot of different ways for Elspeth here. Elspeth isn't the only familiar face we see on the plane. We also have Obnixilis up to no good, Vivian, Tezzeret, and they're all sort of, it's almost like a side story, but it's still deeply connected to what New Capenna is going through. So what brings you to being like, we need to bring these characters back for this?
Vivian did not originally come to New Capenna to be drawn into this Phyrexian conflict.
Yeah.
She's aware of it. She's moderately connected to the Gatewatch, but she wasn't actively searching, and Tezzeret found her and pulled her aside into something. So we know Tezzeret is sort of playing both sides here.
Yeah, he's always sort of in the mix.
Yeah.
He's playing his side.
One thing Vivian is looking for is she is looking for a plane that really emphasizes the balance between nature and civilization. Her arc bow is the result of, you know, this very nature-oriented druids on her home plane and the technology people on her own plane before it got wiped out. And she's realizing she needs to find the balance between nature and civilization, both inside herself and inside a world.
Right.
And she's really looking for that and hoping to find something like that on New Capenna.
But sort of stumbles onto a deeper
thing.
We think about what planeswalkers are going to be in sets kind of in a variety of different ways. There's sort of the gameplay implications of like what planeswalker cards do we want to have, what color sort of spaces do we want them to be in. But we also think about who are they as characters and what makes sense for their stories and where they are and where they're going. And then also sometimes there's just really resonant things like Obnixilis is our demon planeswalker, and this is a setting of demon mobster bosses. So it was just kind of a really good fit, both narratively and then mechanically as well, around just he's a cool person to have in this setting, and it's an opportunity that we don't often get where there's this kind of like beautiful connection between the two.
And I mean, I feel like anyone who hears the words Mobnixilis is immediately like, yes, approved.
Would you like to put Obnixilis in pinstripes. Yes, I would.
That sounds fantastic.
Thank you. But then with someone like Vivian, on the other hand, she sort of fills this kind of ranger, tracker, explorer, investigator. Like, that's a lot of the things that she does. And so when it's someone who's going to meet with Urabrask and maybe not immediately take like a sort of a hasty action and kind of use this as a place to learn and to investigate and to kind of develop these things. And then it also gives us a little bit of a contrast to sort of think about this is a city setting, and what happens when you are a planeswalker that's whole thing is nature is kind of put into this place, and that gives us this sort of narrative contrast to play off of as well.
Right. And I think when it comes to getting a clue, I don't think Tamio is going to be showing up anytime soon, so...
Sorry, not sorry. Like, I got nothing for you.
I did not make that. I want the internet to know I did not make that decision personally. Please, please don't.
Well, some of us approve, you know. Don't listen to the negative.
They're just the deep joy of watching people's reactions was pretty strong.
Yeah.
So.
That's a really interesting thing you brought up, though, narrative versus mechanical. Is there often times that you find that one has to take priority, or you'd rather always sort of have that be that perfect balance?
In an ideal world, there would be kind of the perfect balance between the two of them, but we are making a game as much as we're telling stories, and the game needs to be fun and it needs to work. So sometimes we might have to make sort of changes or adjustments in our story in order to kind of support that gameplay element. And sometimes we can still work with game design and be like, hey, we want this really cool thing that we want to stick in our story. Can we make that happen in the game space? Is it going to cause problems for you?
Right.
So we really try and work on the world building side really closely and collaboratively with the game design side to kind of make as much of a complete experience as we can from the ground up.
Complete. So you're saying it's not an exact science?
It is not. It is an art form. It is an art form for sure.
Yeah, it's really a balancing act. I think that's one of the things that's most important for people to understand with these stories is it is really about balancing a narrative with what makes a fun card game and how the nitty-gritty of how that fun card game gets made. You know, like, oh, why wasn't this character there? Or this character would have been perfect. Someone probably thought of it. I know, like, I'm pestering the creative team all the time. Like, this would be cool and this would be cool. Here's a 30 bullet long list. I'm not even joking. Here's a 30 bullet long list of what you should do with this particular set. And then maybe they get to use like 3 or 4 of them and squeeze them in.
Yeah.
But you know, you have to balance with what
totally
the needs are.
Yeah, we often we leave more things on the cutting room floor, so to speak.
Right.
We don't cut film, I'm sorry. But then we are actually able to put in any given set because we have all of these sort of competing things. We want to make the world resonant, and we want to hit the tropes. We want to have a story. We want to not like throw all of the story at you at once, so we can slowly dull it out over time for a satisfying experience. So it is a delicate balancing process that sort of comes with a lot of negotiations.
Right. It's an awesome product in the end. I know we haven't seen all the previews yet, but are there any characters that either of you are both excited for?
I just love their costuming.
Yeah.
That's something that we've been doing more of, and I think we sort of really saw it in like Call Time and some of our earlier sets where we're taking these characters and we're saying, what would they wear in this setting? And we're not just sort of keeping them in their like sort of blanket standard costuming, we're redesigning it to fit in. And obviously in this one, we have some really fun narrative beats where like Elsbeth basically gets dressed up, and I'm like, oh, I love it. This is like every trope that is my favorite. It's like changing scene. And so we get to decide, well, what does Elsbeth look like? How do we sort of keep her practical kind of paladin armor aesthetic, but also throw her in a flapper-inspired outfit with a big poofy stole and just like really kind of play with the visual elements of the setting with recognizable characters.
I'm going to be more specific and say Perry the Pulverizer. He's the commander of the Broker's commander deck. He's the one who enforces contracts. And he also has a heart of gold, which is a problem when his job is breaking kneecaps.
I see. Very cool. And Perry's a great name for a rhino.
Yeah. Perry the Pulverizer is just...
We have a lot of really
so many,
tasty alliteration in
Henzi
this.
Toolbox Store and stuff like that, right? They're amazing. Amazing.
The art so far that's been revealed is absolutely stunning. Some of the card previews that we've seen, this obviously contributes to, I think, was going to be a really exciting season of Booster Fun.
Yes, we have several different Booster Fun treatments that we're going on. Kind of all of it's riffing in similar but different places around Art Deco kind of as an aesthetic. And we also have really drawing influences from the architecture in both in our land cards, but also in these sort of like in our gilded deco frames, where we're really wanted to emphasize that these are gold cards.
They're gilded.
Exactly. It's just this like little nod to kind of the intersection between our game's mechanics and the aesthetics that we have chosen to express those mechanics.
Yeah, yeah.
And so every 3-color card in the set has both a connection to the family, and then will also have its own gold treatment that's very shiny. Very shiny.
Yeah, and I love the special art that, for instance, shows the family crest, and they all have that similar aesthetic. They all look great together, and I think that's one of the most fun parts about me for these new sets and the showcase arts.
And so sometimes we also like to think about what they look like when you're putting them all together. And in the case of the lands, we were also thinking about these are similar to the Triumph cycle that were in Ikoria. So we also wanted them to look good next to those cards as well. So if you have the borderless versions of those Triumphs and you put the borderless version of one of the hideouts, then you're going to kind of find that they sort of still feel like a complete collection, even though they're coming out pretty far apart. And we also wanted, even when we were thinking about the sort of booster fun versions of these cards, that there's a borderless version of those Triumphs, and we wanted to have a cool borderless version of the hideouts, so that if you have your fanciest deck, you can have all of them out there together, and they're gonna look really cool and really complete.
That's awesome. Jay, I gotta know, you spent so much time developing the lore, you spent so much time building the worlds. What is the feeling now that you not just get one piece of art, but multiple pieces of art for the things that you've helped come up with?
It's weird for me because most of my job is actually nitpicking the people who are doing a lot of the lore writing, right? Like, I am that guy on the internet comments section, but before it gets to the internet.
Right.
You're our internal internet comment.
Yeah,
There you
so
go.
I'm like, maybe let's not do that with this. Maybe, so it's very nice to be able to see when these things finally come to fruition and all these different elements come together. And the web fiction, for instance, there's been a big push lately on the web fiction side, and have it start to let's say, build to maybe things that might happen down the road that have been a lot of work, and it's very nice seeing it come together.
Yeah.
Not just for myself, but for the team.
Yeah, it must be a great feeling when you're like, hey, we want this mechanic, and then the best game designers in the world make it. We want this art, and then the best artists in the world make it as well.
There's something very satisfying about it that's just really exciting to put my idea out there, and then someone's like, oh yeah, it's real now. Wow, all right. One of the other parts that I love about having these booster fund treatments is that it gives us a chance to explore different sides of the art that we might not have, both stylistically. So in this one, we really lean heavily into kind of those Art Deco art styles of the time period, but also just in like the costuming. So we have multiple versions of ELSPETH, and we have her like truly incredibly glamorous versions. And then we have a little bit more of this sort of grounded version that's kind of the reality of it. So it lets us just like play with things that we've spent a lot of time developing and designing, and actually get to realize and see across multiple iterations of a card.
Yeah.
We actually have the very fancy version of ELSPETH behind us there.
Beautiful gown.
With a weapon you might find out more about if you read some of the story.
Ooh, very exciting.
Totally not a special fairy, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure as fans of the game as well, it's great to be able to see the full realization of a world, not just one aspect of it, but almost as a fan, what you would want to see other parts, and you get to have that now.
It's like we get to do fan art of our own art.
Yeah, there you go. I know I speak for a lot of people when I say that we are so excited for this set to come out, and it's really great to know that, you know, real fans of the game and the world are also the ones developing it and making it reality. So we're in good hands. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us, and this set has been so fun to work on, so I'm really excited for people to get to play it.
Thank you. The story, I think, is going to excite a lot of people and maybe lead down new avenues.
Fan theories?
Fan theories?
Fan theories?
I've never had a fan theory in my life.
We'll check the spreadsheets to see if that's true. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Make sure you check out the show notes for all of the links to the Magic story that's been released so far. You don't want to miss it. And on April 7th, the debut video for Streets of New Capenna will be out on Magic's official YouTube and Twitch channels. And don't forget, family means business. I can't wait.